Okay, so we're on to day 19 of the 2022 challenge for the Sociology guy, looking this week at families and households. Now, we set these questions. One says, outline and explain two ways demographic changes in society have changed family structures. And the second one is an item question. It's apply material from item A, analyse two reasons for the changes in birth rates. Now, what I've done here is I've given you a more similar item than we've seen in the last couple of years on AQA A-level sociology papers. Two pretty easily definable hooks in there, changes in social attitudes and the costs incurred in rising children. And also, sort of like it just highlights that the fact that it is declining, the birth rate is declining. So a couple of ways in which we can see demographic changes have changed family structures. One big one is migration. Obviously, with the impact of globalization, we've seen increased migration, and this has led to lots of different changes to the types of households that we have in the UK. So we have more lone person and more shared households. This is particularly because of economic migration or people moving over for their education. So many migrants to the UK are young and they come to work or they come here for their education. This increases the number of households that are either shared or a lone person household, and it lowers the ageing population and the dependency ratio. In the UK, we do have an ageing population, and one of the things that counters our ageing population is increased migration, particularly of people who are in the career stages of their life, or learning or doing their education. It means that brings the aging population down slightly. Obviously, we've seen changes of that with the likes of Brexit, and obviously after the COVID pandemic, lots of people sort of like migrated out of the, lots of people migrated out of the UK. And so sort of like that's had an impact on the population. We're seeing sort of like gaps in certain jobs, particularly in things like service industries, as a result of that. Other ways that migration has impacted on family structures, things like cultural variations to the structure and organisation of families. Often students sort of like kind of wrongly assume that Black Caribbean families are all lone parents. They're not. There are different attitudes based upon the different islands that people live in. This is based off the work of Tracy Reynolds, who looked at how Bayesian families tend to be more traditional, more likely to be a nuclear family, whereas Jamaican families, they don't have they're a little bit more secular. They don't see sort of like marriage as being a social institution, and therefore you're less likely to have married families there. You still will have them, but it's less of a cultural expectation for people to get married. Also, looking at digitally extended families, obviously with migration, it also means that people moving out of the UK, particularly skilled people moving out overseas to do other jobs elsewhere. And this leads to the creation of digitally extended families where people may keep in touch with their relatives through things like Skype, through Teams, through Zoom, lots of other bits of technology that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. And obviously this has expanded massively during the COVID pandemic. We can also sort of like say that it's created more lone person and less extended families through the isolation of family members. So emigration out of the UK, particularly by young families who are geographically mobile, can leave elderly relatives isolated. Also, what you find is lots of elderly people sort of like retiring overseas, particularly sort of like expat communities in like Spain. And what you may find is that they then become isolated from the remainder of their families. Other ways in which demographic change have impacted on family structures, well, we've got more lone person and shared households, as I've mentioned already. We see increased cohabitation. Now, this is because people are living longer and are waiting longer to get married, and therefore they may do what we call a try before you buy type of relationship, where what they will do is they will live together before they get married. They may purchase property before they get married. They may even have children before they get married, because our society has changed to such an extent that marriage is not seen as being forever anymore. We've moved into a period of what we see as being serial monogamy. It's influenced the number of children born to unmarried parents. Around about 50% of children are born to unmarried parents, although that doesn't necessarily mean that we've had an increase in lone parents. What it means is that their parents aren't married, they may be cohabiting. This is seen as a kind of social change, that having a child is more of a commitment than getting married in contemporary society. There's a lifelong commitment to having a child with somebody. We've also seen a growth of reconstituted families as we've moved into this era of kind of serial monogamy where people pick and choose their relationships, and if the relationship isn't working out for them, it's a lot easier for them to change. And particularly as we are living longer, it means we're more likely to want to change. And we're seeing an increased number of remarriages. We've got greater life expectancy. People may move into the 40s, 50s, maybe in an unhappy marriage, instead of sort of like in the past where they may have died when they were 60 or 70 and staying in that relationship. What they do is they change their relationship now, seen as being one of the big growth areas. One of the demographic areas that more people are getting married and divorced now is in the 60s. According to the Office for National Statistics. So that's a big change. We're living longer, so therefore we're having more marriages and divorces. And beanpole families as well, the increased life expectancy. But what tends to happen with the increased life expectancy, people aren't necessarily spending those years in good health, and therefore they may have to move in with their children, their grown-up children, and their grandchildren to provide care, and also the financial implications we've seen recently where grown-up children are moving in back in with their parents, and even in some instances moving their children in with their parents. So there's grandparents, grandparents, parents, children, all in one, all under one roof. So let's look at my response to the question. One way in which demographic changes have changed family structures is through the ageing population in the UK. So there I've identified my demographic change. With increased life expectancy over the past century in the UK and a falling birth rate, the average age of the UK population has increased, so that the average age of British citizens is in their mid-40s. Now, so there I've explained what the ageing population is. Now I need to explain how this might change family structures. This has led to changes in the structure of family life in the UK as more elderly people and less children are being born. There's been a growth of vertically extended or beanpole families. These multi-generational families have closer links between generations, with grandparents often providing care for their grandchildren whilst their parents are in work. Alternatively, adults are providing care for elderly parents who, despite living longer, may be subject to ill health associated with old age, such as dementia or mobility issues. This may necessitate elderly parents moving in with their grown children and their grandchildren, creating a beanpole family under the same roof. And we have seen a rise at still a very small percentage of the population, around about 1 or 2%, where we have multi-generational families living under the same roof. So there's my first reason. A second way in which demographic changes in society have changed family structures is through migration. With increased migration both into and out of the UK, many extended families are separated by international boundaries. This can occur in several ways, with immigrants to the UK being separated from extended families in their homeland, or through emigration, either for work or retirement, creating a greater distance between families. So what I've done is I've highlighted migration, and now I need to sort of like highlight sort of like how that impacts on family structures. Furthermore, migration into the UK from EU nations was based around young professionals coming to the UK for education or employment, which generated an increase in lone person households. So there's my big circle. This is talking about family structures and household structures as well, or communal households where people shared properties with others in a similar position to them. This migration of students and young professionals changes the structure of families and households from being based upon couples to a more diverse structure, with almost a third of households in the UK being lone person households in 2018. This is pretty much split into older people and younger people who live on their own. So you could have talked about increased life expectancy here, leading to an increase in lone person households, particularly females, and how like they may live beyond their partner may have passed away and they're living in a home on their own as they get older. You could have gone that way with that one as well. Looking at this question, question 2, apply material from A to May, analyse 2 reasons for changes in birth rates. The links are pretty obvious in there. There's 2 quite meaty hooks there: changes in social attitudes and the costs incurred of raising children. How I've looked at it here, I've broken it down into a number of different reasons on this graphic. Looking at women's career aspirations. So women are pursuing careers and so delay having children, which reduces the number of children. Not necessarily in the item. We could argue that it's changing social attitudes there. Women's changing career aspirations, changing attitudes to relationships. We'd certainly see that as being changing attitudes in society. Movement from romantic love and lifelong relationships to confluent love and serial monogamy means less stability in relationships, and therefore we have less children. Improved contraception, we could talk about that as being a change in social attitudes. The availability and effectiveness of contraception has improved over the past 50 years. And we've linked in a bit of legislation here, legalization of abortion in 1969. Costs associated with child rearing, well, we've seen that in the item, so we can talk about things like childcare costs, costs of raising children, lost earnings from children being dependent on adults. It means that we're having less children in society. Children are now an economic burden rather than an economic asset. We can also talk about the welfare state and costs of children. Children were originally seen as an insurance policy for old age, so this is why we had more. These kids would look after you in your old age, but now with the creation of the welfare state and things like pensions, it means that we are less dependent upon our children in our old age. And we can also look at the decline in the infant mortality rate, less insurance children as children living into adulthood. I wouldn't use that one because it doesn't really link in with the item, but it's another reason why the birth rate is declining. So let's look at my reasons. One reason for changes in birth rates is due to changes in social attitudes. Item A, again, remembering that you have to kind of signpost to the examiner that you've used the item, and now we're going to develop this idea. What do we mean by changing social attitudes? And I've put in some sociology here. Sociologists argue that as we move into a late modern era, there's been an increase in individualism. Giddens argues that people have become more reflexive in their attitudes, looking at themselves and reflecting upon their actions, striving for self-improvement. And as a result, people have moved from having lifelong relationships based upon romantic love to a series of monogamous relationships based on confluent love. So I've taken the hook, the changes in social attitudes, and I've explained it using Giddens and Giddens' idea of serial monogamy and confluent love. Now I need to link it in to why this has an impact on birth rates. Giddens argued that people no longer look to partners as a means of completing them, but look for people that fulfill an individual's needs at a moment in time and move from one relationship to another when those needs change. As a result, people are less likely to make long-term commitments, such as getting married or having children with a partner, until they are certain that the relationship will last a significant amount of time. As a result, people delay having children until later in life. I'm starting to mention something like how people delay having children, and therefore this leads to a lower birth rate. This reduces the fertility window for having children for many women, with the average age of first child being the late 20s for women in contemporary society compared to early 20s 50 years ago. As a result, they have less children, as can be evidenced by the fertility rate falling to 1.7 children per woman from over 2.4 in previous generations. So there's my reason. I've taken the hook, changing social attitudes. I've used some sociology to explain why social attitudes have changed, and then I've talked about the effect of that on the birth rate. A second reason for changes in birth rates have been the costs incurred in raising children. Item A, again, signposted. Over time, children have moved from becoming an economic asset to an economic burden. In pre-industrial and early industrial society, children helped to provide the family with income from either employment or through helping with farming. With the introduction of compulsory education, which has been extended through to the age of 18, children are no longer units of production, but units of consumption. So not only have I talked about sort of like how the costs are incurred in raising children, but I've explained why the costs have changed. Society has moved to being more child-centred. This level of consumption has increased, and children are now seen as being an economic burden. Estimates have placed the cost of raising a child from 140 to 200,000 to the age of 18. And with the abolition of student grants and the introduction of tuition fees and student loans, many sociologists argue that children are often dependent upon financial support from their parents into their mid-20s, and in some cases beyond. And here's my link at the bottom. As a result, people may choose to have less children than in the past, or may even choose not to have children at all because of the costs. So you can see how I've gone from the item hook through to why these changes have occurred, and then the impact it has on the birth rate. So that's the process I've gone through. And you would see those two paragraphs put together, I would see as being top band. Day 20, which will be coming out very shortly, outline and explain two ways that globalization has led to changes in gender roles and relationships. A lot of that will probably be centered around work and the transmission of norms and values, particularly transmission of norms and values around feminism and more equality within relationships. And item A, there have been many changes to the organisation and structure of family life over the past 50 years. Increased globalisation, technological innovation, and changes to employment patterns have all impacted on family life. Very similar question, only this time it looks at two reasons for changes in the structure and organisation of family life. One of the reasons why I do some similar questions together is to show you how you can actually condense your revision into 3 or 4 key areas and how you can use that to answer most questions. Okay, so that sums up today, day 19 of the 2022 challenge. Hopefully, you'll join me for day 20. And then we're going to take a little bit of a move. We're going to look at some of the methods and concepts questions. We're going to skip forward to kind of day 51, 52, 53, 54, and 55. And then we're going to go back through the remaining options because obviously we're getting very close to the first exam now. And I want to get those MIC questions in there for you. Thanks for watching.